The silent war for your soul. Are you losing it? There is a war happening right now, unseen, unfelt by the physical senses, yet deeply experienced in the quiet corners of your mind and the hidden chambers of your heart. It does not make headlines. It does not shake the ground beneath your feet. It does not announce itself with explosions or visible enemies. Instead, it whispers. It disguises itself as your own thoughts. It hides behind distractions, desires, fears, and subtle compromises. This is the silent war for your soul. Most people live their entire lives unaware that they are in the middle of this battle. They wake up, go through routines, chase goals, entertain themselves, and fall asleep again, never questioning the invisible forces shaping their decisions, emotions, and ultimately their destiny. But deep inside there is a tension, a pull, a quiet unease that something more is at stake than just success, comfort, or survival. This war is not fought with weapons, but with choices, not with armies, but with thoughts, not on battlefields, but within you. Every day, whether you realize it or not, something is trying to influence who you become. Something is trying to shape your beliefs, distort your perception of truth, weaken your discipline, and slowly pull you away from your purpose. And at the same time, there is another force, gentle yet powerful, calling you higher, inviting you to clarity, truth, strength, and transformation. The question is not whether the war exists. The question is, are you aware of it? And more importantly, are you winning? Or are you slowly losing without even realizing it? Because the most dangerous battles are not the ones you fight knowingly. The most dangerous battles are the ones you don't even know you're in. And in this war, ignorance is not neutral. It is defeat. So before you dismiss this as metaphor or exaggeration, pause for a moment. Reflect on your thoughts. Your habits, your struggles, your impulses, the things you want to do but don't, the things you know are wrong but still choose, the moments you feel disconnected, lost, or empty without knowing why. What if those moments are not random? What if they are signs of a deeper conflict? What if your soul is under attack, not in a dramatic, obvious way, but in a slow, subtle erosion? And what if, right now, as you read this, you are standing in the middle of that battlefield? This is not meant to scare you. It is meant to wake you up, because once you see the war, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. And once you recognize it, everything changes. Topic 1. The battlefield within. Where the war truly happens. The greatest deception about this war is that people expect it to come from the outside. They imagine enemies as external forces, circumstances, other people, visible struggles. But the truth is far more unsettling. The real battlefield is within you. It is in your thoughts. It is in your emotions. It is in your desires. It is in the quiet decisions no one else sees. Every day, you experience a constant internal dialogue, a voice that encourages and another that discourages, a thought that pushes you toward discipline and another that invites you toward comfort, a moment where you feel called to do what is right and another where you justify doing what is easy. This is not random mental noise. This is the front line of the war. There is a part of you that seeks truth, growth, and purpose. It wants to rise. It wants to become better. It feels drawn toward something higher, even if it cannot fully explain it. This part of you is aligned with your soul, your true essence. But there is another part, a force that pulls in the opposite direction. It thrives on distraction. It feeds on instant gratification. It weakens your willpower. It whispers lies that sound like truth. It tells you that discipline is too hard, that change can wait, that compromise is harmless. And here's the most dangerous part. It often sounds like you. That's why so many people lose this war without realizing it, because they don't recognize the enemy. They think every thought that enters their mind belongs to them. They trust impulses without questioning them. They follow feelings without examining their origin. But not every thought deserves your trust. Not every desire deserves your obedience, and not every voice in your mind is leading you toward your best self. The battlefield within you is complex because it is invisible. There are no clear lines, no uniforms, no obvious indicators of who is on which side. Everything feels personal. Everything feels internal. And because of that, it becomes incredibly easy to drift, to slowly move in the wrong direction without ever making a conscious decision to do so. Think about how this plays out in real life. You know you should wake up earlier, but you choose to sleep in. You know you should focus, but you reach for distractions. You know you should speak truth, but you choose silence or compromise. You know you should grow, but you stay comfortable. These are not just small, insignificant choices. They are movements on the battlefield. Every time you choose discipline over comfort, you strengthen your position. Every time you choose truth over convenience, you gain ground. Every time you resist a destructive impulse, you push back against the forces trying to weaken you. But every time you ignore what you know is right, every time you give in to what you know is harmful, every time you choose the easier path over the better one, you are not standing still. You are losing ground, and the most dangerous part is that this loss is gradual. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day completely lost. It happens in small compromises, tiny decisions, subtle shifts. Until one day you look at your life and realize you are far from who you were meant to be. This is how the silent war is won, not through dramatic defeat, but through quiet surrender. And that's why awareness is the first step to victory. Because once you begin to see your thoughts as part of a larger battle, everything changes. You stop blindly following impulses. You start questioning your inner dialogue. You become intentional about your choices. You recognize that every moment matters. You begin to understand that your mind is not just a passive space where thoughts happen. It is an active battlefield where decisions shape your destiny. And once you see that, you can no longer live unconsciously. You can no longer pretend that your choices don't matter. You can no longer ignore the war, because now you know it's happening inside you. And every day, whether you realize it or not, you are either winning or losing. The enemy you don't see. How the war is fought in silence. If the battlefield is within you, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Who or what is the enemy? This is where the war becomes even more dangerous, because unlike physical battles, where the enemy is visible, identifiable, and external, this war is fought against something that hides, something that does not announce itself, something that prefers to remain undetected. The greatest threat to your soul is not loud, aggressive, or obvious. It is subtle, it is patient, it is quiet. And because of that, it is incredibly effective. The enemy in this war does not need to destroy you instantly. It does not need to overwhelm you in one moment of dramatic failure. In fact, that would be too obvious, too easy to detect, too easy to resist. Instead, it works slowly. It erodes you. It influences you. It reshapes you. One thought at a time. The strategy is not confrontation. The strategy is infiltration. It begins with something so small you barely notice it, a thought, a suggestion, a feeling. Something that seems harmless, something that feels natural, something that doesn't raise alarm. Just this once. It's not a big deal. You can fix it later. You deserve this. It's too hard right now. These are not just random phrases. These are entry points, because once a thought is accepted, it becomes a belief. And once a belief is formed, it begins to shape your actions. The enemy doesn't need to control your entire life. It only needs to influence your thinking, because your thinking controls everything else. And here's the terrifying part. Most people never question their thoughts. They assume that whatever they feel or think must be valid. They assume that their impulses are trustworthy. They assume that their internal dialogue is neutral. But what if it isn't? What if some of your thoughts are not guiding you, but deceiving you? What if the voice telling you to stay comfortable is actually leading you into stagnation? What if the voice telling you to give up is not protecting you from failure, but ensuring it? What if the voice telling you that you are not capable, not worthy, not strong enough, is not telling you the truth? This is how the war is fought, not through force, through suggestion, because suggestion is powerful. It bypasses resistance, it slips past your defenses, it becomes part of your identity without you even realizing it. And over time, those small suggestions compound. They shape how you see yourself, they shape how you see the world, they shape what you believe is possible, until eventually they shape who you become. That's why the enemy doesn't need to shout. A whisper is enough, a subtle shift is enough, a small compromise is enough, because the goal is not immediate destruction. The goal is gradual transformation, but not into something stronger, into something weaker, more distracted, more dependent, more disconnected from purpose. And the most dangerous part is that this process often feels normal. You don't feel like you're losing. You feel like you're just living. You feel like you're just going through your day. You feel like you're just making choices. But underneath that surface, something is changing. Your discipline is weakening. Your focus is fading. Your clarity is blurring. Your sense of purpose is dimming. And it happens so slowly that you don't notice the shift until it has already taken hold. This is why awareness is not optional. It is essential. Because once you understand how the enemy operates, you begin to see patterns. You begin to recognize when a thought is leading you toward growth or pulling you away from it. You begin to pause before acting on impulse. You begin to question what you once accepted without thinking. You begin to separate yourself from the noise. And in that separation, you gain power. Because you realize something crucial. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who chooses which thoughts to follow. And that realization changes everything, because it means you are not powerless in this war. You are not a victim of your impulses. You are not controlled by your emotions. You have the ability to observe, to question, to decide. But that ability only matters if you use it, if you remain passive, if you continue to accept every thought without examination, if you allow subtle influences to shape you without resistance. Then the war will continue, and you will continue to lose ground. Not because you are weak, but because you are unaware. The enemy thrives in silence, it thrives in distraction, it thrives in the absence of awareness. But the moment you begin to see it, the moment you begin to recognize its patterns, the moment you stop blindly accepting every thought as truth, something shifts. You begin to take control of the battlefield. You begin to fight back. Not with noise, not with force, but with clarity, with intention, with awareness. And in a war that is fought in silence, that is the most powerful weapon you have, because once you see the enemy, it can no longer hide. The slow drift. How souls are lost without noticing. No one wakes up one day and consciously decides to lose their soul. There is no moment where a person stands still, looks at their life and says, "Today I choose to drift away from truth, from purpose, from who I was meant to be." That's not how it happens. The loss is quieter than that. It is slower. It is almost invisible. It happens in what feels like ordinary life. This is what makes the silent war so dangerous. You don't lose by making one catastrophic decision. You lose by making thousands of small, seemingly insignificant ones. The process is not destruction, it is drift. And drift is deceptive. Because when you drift, you don't feel like you're moving. You feel like you're staying the same. You feel like you're just living. But in reality, you are being carried slowly, steadily away from where you were meant to be. Imagine standing in the ocean. At first, the water is calm, you're relaxed. You're not trying to go anywhere, you're just floating. But little by little, the current begins to move you, not enough to alarm you, not enough to make you panic, just enough to shift your position. You don't notice it immediately. But after some time, when you finally look back, the shore is far away. That is exactly how the soul drifts. It begins with small compromises, moments where you know what is right, but choose what is easy, moments where you feel a quiet conviction, but ignore it, moments where you could act with discipline, but choose comfort instead. At first, these moments seem harmless. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. It's just today. It's just this once. It's not that serious. But the problem is not the individual moment. The problem is the pattern it creates. Because every choice you make reinforces something within you. Every time you choose discipline, you strengthen discipline. Every time you choose distraction, you strengthen distraction. Every time you choose truth, you strengthen clarity. Every time you choose compromise, you weaken it. This is the law of internal formation. What you repeatedly do, you become. And this is where the drift becomes dangerous, because over time, those small choices stop feeling like choices. They become habits, and habits become identity. You no longer feel like you are choosing distraction. You feel like you are just the kind of person who struggles to focus. You no longer feel like you are choosing comfort. You feel like you are just someone who lacks discipline. You no longer feel like you are choosing compromise. You feel like you are just doing what everyone else does. This is how the drift hides itself. It convinces you that what was once a choice is now just who you are, and once something becomes part of your identity, it becomes much harder to challenge, because now changing your behavior feels like changing yourself. But here's the truth most people never realize. You didn't become that way overnight, and you are not trapped there. You were shaped slowly, and that means you can reshape yourself intentionally, but only if you recognize the drift, only if you become aware of how far you've moved, only if you are willing to look honestly at your life and ask uncomfortable questions. Where have I compromised? Where have I chosen comfort over growth? Where have I ignored what I know is right? Where have I allowed myself to drift? These questions are not easy because they force you to confront reality. They force you to see the gap between who you are and who you could be. And that gap can be painful, but it is also powerful, because awareness creates the possibility of change. Without awareness, you continue drifting. With awareness, you can begin to swim back, and make no mistake. Swimming back is not easy because drift is effortless. It requires no intention, no resistance, no discipline. You simply go with the current. But returning to where you were meant to be, that requires effort, it requires clarity, it requires decision, it requires you to go against the current. And that is why so many people never do it. Not because they can't, but because it's uncomfortable, because it's hard, because it requires them to confront themselves. But here's what they don't realize. The longer you drift, the harder it becomes to return. Because distance increases, habits deepen, identity solidifies, and what once required a small correction now requires a complete transformation. This is why the silent war is urgent. Not in a dramatic, fear-driven way, but in a real, undeniable way. Because every day you drift without awareness, you are moving further away from your purpose. Further away from clarity, further away from strength, further away from truth. And the scariest part is that you can live an entire life in that state, functioning, surviving, even succeeding by external standards, but internally disconnected, unfulfilled, unaligned, because your soul knows when you are not where you are meant to be. It feels it, even if you can't explain it. Even if you try to ignore it, even if you distract yourself from it, that feeling is not random. It is a signal, a warning, a reminder that something is off. that you have drifted and that you need to return. The question is not whether you have drifted. Everyone has in some way. The real question is, will you recognize it and choose to come back? Or will you continue floating until the distance becomes too great to ignore? Because in the silent war for your soul, you don't lose by one decision. You lose by drifting until you forget who you were supposed to become. The illusion of control. Why you think you're winning when you're not. One of the most dangerous stages in the silent war for your soul is not when you are obviously losing. It is when you think you are winning, because as long as you believe you are in control, you stop questioning yourself. You stop examining your habits. You stop challenging your thoughts. You stop paying attention. And that is exactly when the war is being lost in the background. The illusion of control is powerful because it allows you to feel secure while slowly drifting in the wrong direction. It convinces you that everything is fine, even when subtle compromises are reshaping your life from within. You tell yourself, I can stop any time. You say, this isn't affecting me. You believe, I know what I'm doing. But control is not proven by what you say. It is revealed by what you consistently do. If you cannot choose discipline when it is uncomfortable, you are not in control. If you cannot resist distraction when it is easy, you are not in control. If you cannot act on what you know is right, you are not in control. And yet most people never test this. They assume control without ever challenging themselves enough to prove it. That's how the illusion survives, because as long as you stay in comfortable patterns, you never face the truth about your level of discipline, your level of awareness, your level of strength. You remain in a loop of perceived control, and within that loop, the drift continues. This is why the war is so subtle. It doesn't need to take away your sense of control. It only needs to distort it. It allows you to feel like you are choosing your life, while quietly shaping those choices behind the scenes. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. You scroll endlessly, telling yourself you'll stop soon, but you don't. You delay important actions, convincing yourself you'll do them later, but later never comes. You engage in habits you know are not good for you while believing they are harmless. You avoid discomfort while telling yourself it's just temporary. Each of these moments reinforces the illusion, because you feel like you are choosing, but in reality, you are reacting. You are following patterns. You are being guided by impulses that you have not examined, and the more you repeat those patterns, the stronger they become, until eventually, what once felt like a choice becomes automatic. And once something becomes automatic, it controls you. This is the paradox. The more you believe you are in control without testing it, the less control you actually have. True control is not comfort. It is not ease. It is not the absence of struggle. True control is the ability to act against your impulses when necessary, to choose discipline over comfort, to choose truth over convenience, to choose long-term growth over short-term satisfaction. And that kind of control is not assumed. It is built, it is tested, it is proven. But most people avoid the very situations that would reveal the truth. They avoid discomfort, they avoid discipline, they avoid self-examination, and in doing so, they protect the illusion. Because as long as they don't challenge themselves, they don't have to confront what they might discover. But here's what makes this dangerous. The illusion of control doesn't just keep you stagnant. It makes you confident in your stagnation. You begin to justify your habits. You begin to defend your choices. You begin to rationalize your lack of progress. You say things like, "This is just how life is. Everyone does this. It's not that serious. I'm doing fine." But fine is often the most dangerous place to be, because fine does not push you to grow. Fine does not challenge you to change. Fine allows you to stay exactly where you are, while slowly drifting further away from where you could be. And over time, that gap grows between who you are and who you were meant to become. At first, it's small, barely noticeable, but as the years pass, it becomes undeniable. And that's when the illusion begins to crack, when you start to feel a deeper dissatisfaction, when you begin to sense that something is missing, when you realize that despite everything feeling fine, you are not fulfilled, you are not aligned, you are not at peace. That is the moment when reality breaks through the illusion, and it can be unsettling, because it forces you to see what you've been avoiding. It forces you to acknowledge that control was not as strong as you thought. It forces you to confront the truth that you have been influenced more than you realized, that your choices have not always been intentional, that the silent war has been shaping you quietly, consistently, over time. But here's the good news. The moment the illusion breaks is the moment real control becomes possible, because now you are aware. Now you can see your patterns. Now you can recognize where you have been reacting instead of choosing. Now you can begin to rebuild. And rebuilding control starts with one simple but powerful shift from unconscious living to intentional living. You begin to pause before acting. You begin to question your impulses. You begin to observe your habits. You begin to make decisions with awareness instead of assumption. And slowly, something changes. You regain influence over your actions. You strengthen your discipline. You sharpen your clarity. You reconnect with your purpose, not all at once, but step by step, choice by choice, moment by moment. Because real control is not about perfection. It is about consistency. It is about showing up again and again with awareness and intention. And in the context of this silent war, that is how you begin to win. Not by pretending you are already in control, but by building it one conscious decision at a time. Because the greatest victory is not avoiding the battle. It is waking up to it, breaking free from illusion, and finally taking your place as someone who chooses instead of someone who drifts. Reclaiming your soul, how to win the war within. At some point, awareness is no longer enough. Seeing the war is powerful. Recognizing the patterns is necessary. Understanding the drift, the illusion, the silent influence, it changes everything. But awareness without action still leads to loss. Because the war does not pause just because you understand it. It continues. Every day, every moment, every decision. So the real question becomes, now that you see it, what will you do? Reclaiming your soul is not a single decision. It is not a moment of motivation. It is not a temporary burst of discipline. It is a process, a deliberate, consistent, often uncomfortable process of taking back control over your mind, your actions, and ultimately, your life. And it begins with something simple, but not easy. You stop living on autopilot, you stop reacting, you stop drifting, you begin to choose, consciously, intentionally, relentlessly. Because the only way to win a silent war is to become louder within yourself than the forces trying to pull you away. And that starts with awareness turned into discipline. You begin by observing your thoughts, not as commands, but as suggestions. You notice when your mind tries to pull you toward comfort instead of growth. You recognize when excuses appear. You identify the patterns that have been shaping you without your permission. And instead of following them automatically, you pause. That pause is power, because in that moment you are no longer being carried. You are choosing your direction, and at first that choice will feel difficult, because you are going against everything you've practiced. You are resisting patterns that have been reinforced over time. You are stepping out of comfort into resistance. But that resistance is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are finally fighting back. Every time you choose discipline when it's uncomfortable, you win a small battle. Every time you act on what you know is right, even when it's hard, you reclaim a piece of yourself. Every time you resist distraction, temptation, or compromise, you strengthen your position. And over time, those small victories compound. They begin to reshape you. They begin to rebuild what was weakened. They begin to restore clarity, strength, and purpose. This is how transformation happens, not in one dramatic moment, but in consistent, intentional action. But there is something deeper that must happen as well, because this war is not just about behavior. It is about identity. You cannot simply change what you do. You must change how you see yourself. If you still see yourself as someone who lacks discipline, you will struggle to act with discipline. If you still see yourself as someone who gives in easily, you will continue to give in. If you still see yourself as someone who is controlled by impulses, you will remain controlled. So part of reclaiming your soul is redefining who you are, not based on your past patterns, but based on the person you choose to become. You begin to see yourself as someone who is aware, someone who is disciplined, someone who is intentional, someone who does not blindly follow every thought or impulse, someone who chooses growth over comfort. And this shift in identity changes how you act. Because now, discipline is not something you force. It is something that aligns with who you are becoming. But even with this shift, the war does not disappear. The enemy does not stop. The whispers do not fade. The temptation to drift does not vanish. That is the reality of this battle. It is ongoing. There is no final moment where you can say, "I've won. I can relax now." Because the moment you become passive again, the drift begins again. So winning this war is not about reaching a permanent state of perfection. It is about maintaining awareness, maintaining discipline, maintaining intention every single day. And that might sound exhausting, but in reality, it becomes freeing, because as you build this awareness, something changes. You are no longer controlled by impulses. You are no longer pulled in every direction by distraction. You are no longer drifting without realizing it. You become grounded, focused, clear. You begin to feel aligned with your actions. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to experience a deeper sense of control, not the illusion of control, but real, tested, proven control. And with that comes something powerful, peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding struggle, but the kind of peace that comes from knowing you are no longer losing yourself, that you are no longer being shaped without your awareness, that you are actively choosing who you become. This is what it means to reclaim your soul. It is not about perfection. It is not about never making mistakes. It is about refusing to drift, refusing to surrender, refusing to live unconsciously. It is about stepping into your life fully aware of the war and choosing every day to stand, to fight, and to grow. Because in the end, the silent war is not about destruction. It is about direction. Every thought you follow, every habit you reinforce, every choice you make is moving you somewhere. The only question is, where? Toward clarity or confusion? Toward strength or weakness? Toward purpose or emptiness? Toward who you were meant to be or away from it? And now that you've seen the war, now that you understand the battlefield, the enemy, the drift, and the illusion, you are no longer unaware. You are no longer passive. You are no longer blind to what is happening within you. Now you are responsible. Responsible for your thoughts, responsible for your actions, responsible for your direction. And that responsibility is not a burden. It is power. Because it means that no matter where you are right now, no matter how far you've drifted, no matter how long you've been unaware, you can begin again. Right now, with one decision, one action, one moment of awareness. and then another, and another, until those moments become a pattern, and that pattern becomes your new identity, and that identity becomes your life. Because in the silent war for your soul, you are not just a participant, you are the battlefield, you are the decision maker, you are the one who chooses. And that means you are the one who decides whether you lose it or reclaim it.